Alrighty, video 5.2. So here we're talking again about semi-exotic use cases. This one once again inspired by York University and some of the cool innovative things they're doing there. And one of the things they wanted to do was to be able to combine live presentations or demonstrations with peer assessment, digital-based peer assessment. So, just to give you the grand sense, imagine you have students giving presentations in the front of the class and then other students watching those presentations and immediately doing assessment of them while they sit and watch. So also, by the way, if you kind of think that through, then the person who presents will very quickly get feedback on their presentation that they can then think about, and once again you can push them to assess that feedback and all the goodness that comes with doing that, and you could even allow them to submit a digital revision if you wanted, and they could use their phone and submit a digital revision. So those are the sort of ideas that we're going to talk about here. Again, just generically, we're imagining that students are submitting, presenting, doing something in a live situation, and this could be, and we'll hit on this, it could be something they do as groups or as individuals, and they're doing it in front of others while others are assessing. And they may be assessing just a subset of the presentations, or maybe they'll be assessing every presentation. That can be completely up to you. And then obviously the group or individual who presented then gets the feedback and decides what to do with it. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we set this up? Well, come back into, I don't know, we'll go into research ethics course, I guess. So I always have, you're going to see me thinking when I do this because I have to think this through a little bit. We can, so depending on whether it's an individual that's presenting or a group that's presenting, we can either do this with the classic if it's individual, or we're going to have to use the case study if it's a group. Man, I really have to think these things through. So with the classic, with the classic it'll be relatively easy to do. What we would do is we would have individuals, and what we might probably ask them to do, if we did the classic, here's how I would do it. Let's say live presentation. Except maybe we'll spell it right. Live presentation. So imagine we have a class of how many ever students. They are now, so what I would say is, if they are presenting, if they're amongst the group of people presenting that day, then I would ask them to submit and say, please just type your name here. Now, you could have other information that they present, something like that, but and we don't even really need them to have their name, but we need them to submit something. I'll explain to you why in a moment. So if they're going to submit something, why not submit their name? And so you would tell the people who are presenting at the very beginning of the class, you'd maybe open up the create phase and say, those of you who are presenting today, please type your name into the create phase. The rest of you do nothing. Okay? And so those people would submit their create phase. That would be it. You would then probably toggle them on to the assess phase. So now one of the critical things when we think about the assess phase is once again going back to this advanced setting and saying, okay, right now we're going to not require everybody to do the create because we kind of have two populations of people going here, right? We have those who are presenting and we have those who are assessing in this class. So and as I think this through, the people who are presenting, yes, they can join into the assessment fund as well, as long as it's not theirs. Yes. Yes, yes. Okay, all good. So we want to say, hey, everybody can get into this assess phase if they want. So we're just going to have that as a setting. Now we're probably not going to have self-assessment on, right? Because these people who are assessing are just acting as assessors. And of course, once again, we're going to create their assessment form. What are the questions we want them to answer as they watch a presentation or demonstration, and provide feedback. So this is the usual where you're going to set up that peer assessment. And I want to say that is all. that is literally all you have to do. Now you want to think a little further again, in the sense of you now had this person present, and as they did so, a bunch of other people. So by the way, let's go a little slower. So this right now says number of peers 5. What this will mean in this context is that only 5, any given assessor will only be asked to assess 5 people. When they open up, when they go into the assessment phase, then here's something else we could do, and I would suggest we do it in this case. We toggle anonymity off for the assess phase. Okay, so what that would mean is that their tabs, which are normally labeled with peer 1, peer 2, peer 3, now will be labeled with people's names. Okay, the presenters who submitted something in the create phase. Now, so one question is, how many of the presenters do you want them to assess? And this could be, the total number of presenters. You might want every student to assess every presenter. So if that's the case, then you want to set this to equal to the number of presenters that you have presenting that day, whatever that may be. If you use a number less than that, then students will only be asked to assess a subset of those presenting, which you might want to do too. You might want to allow your students to just watch some presentations and assess others. So you could pick a number less than the total number of presentations, and then that's what would happen. With anonymity off, as I said, the name will be in the actual tab, and it'll also be in the box when they click on the tab. They'll see the person's name because that's what the person typed in the create phase. If you want that person who's presenting to provide some more information, then you can ask them to do that in the create phase. So they could, for example, submit their slides in the create phase if you wanted them to, or do whatever you want the presenters to do in the create phase. And all that will then be accessible to those assessing who will use the form, etc. Right? So all pretty straightforward there. And then you just have to ask yourself once again, these presenters went up, people assessed them, all this feedback is now available to them. Do you just want them to see the feedback? In which case you turn both of these off, and then they would just see the feedback. I would encourage you to at least ask them to assess the feedback. So this, again, really promotes them to engage with it, and you can shape through your questions the way they engage the feedback. So I would suggest that the presenter, when they're done, go back and be expected to answer a bit of questions about each bit of feedback they received, and you may just want to stop there. You could, if you wanted, also say, okay, you got a bunch of feedback, work on a better version of your talk and submit that as a digital product, perhaps. Perhaps use your phone, because you probably don't want to do another live presentation. So just, giving you a sense of what's available. Again, keep in mind, with these exotic use cases, you're probably going to want to change these instructions for each phase to be very clear with students about how things are going to work. Okay, but that's really it for that straightforward use case where everybody is sort of acting as individuals. Okay, now we know that straightforward use case is not, well, people seem to quickly make the step towards a step more exotic. They will say things like, well, here's what I really want. I want my students in groups of 6. So I'm going to have these 5 different groups of 6. And then within each group, I want them to take turns presenting and assessing. So literally, I'm imagining these as sort of 6 small classrooms where everybody in the classroom will present. And if you're not presenting, you're going to assess everybody that When you're not presenting, you will be assessing all the other presenters. This kind of thing. So that we have these sort of groups of 6 where everybody's going to take turns presenting, and when they're not presenting, they're going to be providing feedback. Okay, so this, I want to just give you a sense of how you can make this more complex. So, whoops, I didn't really need to do that. I'm learning my fancy ways of getting around. I should be sticking to them, right? Here we are. So now we're going to blow out of this totally because we're going to come at it a different way. I'll go back to my activities. Add an activity. Now we're going to use the case study. So I'm going to call these sets of presentations, because what we're really imagining in that previous slide, in case I wasn't clear, and let me be clear. So let me flip back. We'll come back to here in just a second. Let me flip back to this. So what we could be having here, what could be happening, this was one use case I was told about, is they said, well, people will either go into separate rooms or even the corner of I have a big room, and so we're going to send this group to one corner, and this group to another corner, and this group to another corner, and this group to another corner, and these guys in the middle. And they are just going to take turns around their circles presenting. So at the same time, we will be having, a whack of these presentations going on within each of these separate groups, almost like we've created, in this case, 5 classes, 5 smaller classes of things going on. And so this allows you to, really maximize your class time in this way. So if we want to do that, then we would set it up the following way. So if I said 5, right, so we're imagining 5 of these groups. And just to make this, say, so we'll call this northeast corner. Northwest corner. So imagine each of these really corresponds to the sort of location where the person is presenting. I should never type actual things because it takes me forever to do that. But hey, this is supposed to be what makes it human, right? And we'll call these people middlers. The middle. Okay. And so once again, we have the usual grouping options where we can, put people in these various groups, or we can allow them to choose their own group. That's like I showed you before. So basically you have these options, let them randomly get divided into these locations, or allow them to choose. But in this case, we would say we only want 6 people in each group. So they could pick one of these until there were 6 in each group, and then that location wouldn't be available anymore. Or you can manually drag and drop students into the groups. Important thing is we have these different groups. Okay, now when we go to build the activity, again, hopefully some of this is getting familiar to you. We can give each group different information, although here we probably wouldn't, right? We would just say, take turns presenting. Well, actually, okay. Yeah, so in the create phase, we're going to probably ask them once again to please enter their name or something. And it could be, again, their slides if you want. Anything you want them to enter, you could ask them to do so. Now, so that's all. I mean, it could be as little as their name. So they could you could say, okay, now you're in your groups. Everybody, I'm going to open the create phase. Everybody do your thing. Enter your name. Is everybody done? Cool. Okay, we're going to flip to assess phase. Okay. Now, here's where things get kind of cool. In the assess phase, so just to be clear, right now I'm still imagining you are all individuals. You are all presenting as individuals. I'm gonna have to think about the group one in just a second, but let's be clear about that. So with our little groups, each individual is taking turns. So they're presenting as individuals. So now you have the usual number of peers. So if you had 6 people in each group, you might want it to be 5. So that means they are going to have to assess each of the other 5. And in this case, we're going to use within. So let's think of what we've done here. We've created 5 groups of 6 people. And now, so they're kind of like separate units of 6. And so now what we're saying is you are going to assess the other 5 people within your location. Okay, and so you will see their 5 names on tabs. Well, you'll see their 5 names if we do this, if we get rid of anonymity. I mean, you'll see their names anyway if they submitted it. You know, that'll be what you actually see. But if you get rid of anonymity, you'd actually see their names in the tabs as well. And so now what you would do when it's your turn to present, you just present. When it's not your turn to present, you would look at, and the presenter would introduce themselves. You would find their tab, click their tab, and then, again, the usual, right? You have the assessment form that you've set up that they will go through and use to assess that peer. They probably wouldn't do a self-assess in this case. They could. I mean, you could too, just to think it through. You know, after I present, I could be asked to then immediately go to the self-assessment tab, and I could be asked questions about my presentation and how I thought it went. So you could do that, absolutely, perfectly fine. Now this is going to be all pretty sensical, by which I mean that, you know, after I present, after everyone's presented, and we do the reflect phase, we will now see the feedback those people gave us, and we can go ahead and respond just like, you know, our classic sort of instance. We certainly should probably assess the feedback, so you should kind of guide them through the assessment of the feedback. Do you want them to revise and resubmit? Again, you could ask them to revise a digital, you know, like use your phone to create a version of this, and that would work as a way of asking for a revision. But maybe you don't want to ask for a revision. Maybe you just want to keep them assessing the feedback. That's it for that model. Now there is a more complex model that I have in the back of my mind too. Let's think that through together, shall we? Let me get out of here. What would be the more so the more complex model, the other one, close this through, and I do not have a PowerPoint for this. I probably should have had a PowerPoint for this, but I don't. That's okay. Let's just think it through together on the fly. So this is where we would have groups presenting. So imagine we have a group presenting in the front, and then the other groups assessing. And so this is going to bring us very close to the group individual group thing we did in just the previous video, video 5.1. And in fact, really the only difference here is, so in that 5.1 we said, you know, one member of the group will submit, right? The leader of the group will be the one that submits in the create phase. Well, in this case, we would probably just ask that leader to submit the group name, group 1, let's say. That's what they submit in the group phase, and or, you know, whatever. They can have a title for the group, whatever, something that identifies the group. They would just submit that. But otherwise, now you have an audience watching. Yeah, and they do their presentation as a group in front of everybody. And now you would have the audience member. So really it is the group individual group situation now that I think about it, just like I described in the group individual group. The only real difference is, you know, rather than physically submitting something in the create phase, well, they would still physically create just a title. They wouldn't submit an actual group project. They would just submit the name of the group, and then otherwise you would treat them the same. I think that makes sense, right? So, as always, if you're doing one of these exotic cases, especially the first time, you know, hopefully you watched these videos, hopefully you thought it through, but maybe reach out to me. You can do that through info@peerScholar or steve@peerscholar.com. Reach out to me if it's the first time, and let's just think it through together, because I think as you've gotten the sense, as we've gotten through this, there are complexities to what's going on. And it's really good to be able to think through the whole process and figure out, okay, how's this all going to shake out in the end? But I hope these 2 videos at least have shown you, you know, some of the flexibility that's involved here. And actually, you know, now that I'm thinking out loud to myself, I'm thinking there's going to be a video 5.3 as well, which is going to be about a mentoring model when you have different people assessing versus submitting. So I'm going to come to that as video 5.3. But I'm going to stop here for now. But again, just saying, the first time you use that, reach out. Let's do it together. Let's make sure it's cool. Alrighty, later. See you at 5.3.